The story begins in a ruined future where a deadly zombie virus has brought all of humanity to its knees. Death roams freely through the streets, and every corner is haunted by flesh-eating monsters. Amid this terrifying chaos, Francis is struggling to keep his wife Arish and his two sons, Joseph and Lucas, alive. The fresh bloodstains splattered across their vehicle make it obvious that they have only just escaped death's jaws. After battling this hellish world for so long, Francis is now taking his family to his late father's old farmhouse. It is located far away from the city in a remote and isolated area. As soon as their vehicle stops outside the farmhouse, everyone breathes a long sigh of relief. But that sense of comfort lasts only a few moments. Francis cautiously enters the house. The sight inside makes him stop in his tracks. The entire place is in disarray. Broken furniture and scattered belongings clearly show that the devastation caused by the virus has reached even this remote location. Anxiously, he calls out for his father. "Dad?" But the only answer is an eerie silence. With a heavy heart, he walks toward his father's room. The moment he opens the door, his heart sinks. His father's corpse is lying on the bed. A gun rests nearby. One glance is enough for Francis to understand everything. Before he could become infected and turn into a zombie, his father had chosen to end his own life. Suppressing his grief, Francis picks up the gun and straps his father's watch onto his wrist, perhaps to feel close to him one last time. Then, he hears the sound of dragging footsteps from another part of the house. Francis instantly becomes alert. He raises the gun and slowly moves toward the noise. But when he sees what is standing before him, his breath catches. It is his mother. Or rather, what used to be his mother. Now she is nothing more than a living corpse. Deep wounds cover her body, and her eyes show nothing but hunger and violence. The next moment, she lunges at him. Francis's hands begin to shake, but he has no other choice. With tears in his eyes and a heavy heart, he pulls the trigger. The gunshot echoes throughout the house, and his mother collapses to the floor forever. At that moment, Francis's illusion that this place is safe also shatters. The virus has reached here too. By the following afternoon, Francis, Arish, and the two boys bury his parents near the cornfield. No one's eyes remain dry as they place the final layer of soil over the graves. But in this new world, no one has the luxury of mourning for long. Francis looks at his family and explains that, compared to the city, this place is still much safer. There is water here, they can grow crops, and most importantly, there are fewer people. In a world consumed by hunger and overcrowding, this place might be their last hope. Arish and the children reluctantly agree, but zombies are not the only threat inside this house. A silent war is also raging between the family members. There is a strange distance between Francis and Arish. They speak to each other, but bitterness hides behind every word. It feels as though both of them are carrying the burden of a secret the children know nothing about. To lighten the mood, Joseph suggests that they search the nearby barn. Maybe they can find food or useful supplies there. When Francis and Joseph arrive, they call out repeatedly for the caretaker. But once again, only silence answers them. Inside, they discover the truth. Terrified of infection, the caretaker has also taken his own life. A few chickens are still trapped inside cages in one corner. Francis tells Joseph to pick up a key lying near the caretaker's body. Joseph is already frightened, but under his father's pressure, he slowly moves forward. Just as he reaches out to grab the key, the corpse suddenly falls onto him. Joseph screams in terror. He runs outside and desperately begins washing himself over and over under a water tap. Seeing this, Arish's anger explodes. She starts scolding Francis. As a mother, she cannot bear to see her son in such a condition. But Francis's response is even harsher. He says, "I'm not making him weak. I'm teaching him how to survive. Because if both of us are gone tomorrow, he'll have to protect himself." His words make the atmosphere even heavier. That evening, Francis brings back some sugar cane from the cornfield and lovingly gives it to Lucas. A smile spreads across Lucas's face. Francis smiles back. But whenever he looks at Joseph, his behavior becomes cold and strict. It is obvious that his relationship with his two sons is not the same, and there is a very significant reason hidden behind it. As night falls, Arish takes Francis down to the old basement beneath the house. The moment Francis opens the door, his face turns pale. His breathing becomes rapid. He begins trembling uncontrollably. Because this is no ordinary room. This is the place where, during childhood, his father used to beat him mercilessly. He would lock him inside for days without food or water. The walls of that dark room still seem to hold his pain. Even after all these years, the fear has never left him. Night grows deeper. The entire farmhouse sinks into darkness. Under the dim glow of a lantern, the family sits around the dining table eating dinner. But there is an uneasy tension in the air. Then Joseph notices an old radio sitting in the corner of the room. Curious, he walks over and starts turning its dial. For a few seconds, all he hears is static. Then suddenly, a strange melody and mysterious voice begin echoing through the radio. A sound that sends chills down everyone's spine. But they have no idea that this is not just a radio signal. It is the warning of a new disaster approaching. As the old radio's gentle music breaks, the heavy silence hanging over the dinner table, Francis's face flushes with anger. Joseph may have been trying to ease the tension in the house, but Francis dislikes even this small attempt. In a stern voice, he snaps, "Instead of wasting time on this useless thing, finish your food." But this time, Joseph refuses to stay silent. Gathering his courage, he says something that changes the atmosphere completely. Joseph explains that he has received a message from his friend Els. According to her, a secure relief camp has been established in the mountains where survivors are being protected by the military. Food, shelter, and supplies are all available there. Joseph believes they should go there as soon as possible. But Francis dismisses the idea immediately. Irritated, he says, "When we already have our own safe farmhouse, why should we become part of a crowd in some unknown camp?" There is such conviction in his voice that it becomes obvious. He does not want to leave this place at any cost. Arish, however, completely disagrees. She believes military protection is far safer than an isolated farmhouse, especially when their children's lives are at stake. That night, when they return to their room, Arish once again tries to reason with Francis. She tells him that being harsh on the children all the time is only pushing them further away. But Francis gives the same old answer. "Everything I'm doing is for this family's good." Though he appears strong on the outside, Francis is completely broken inside. The moment he closes his eyes, the painful wounds of childhood reopen. He remembers his father's brutal beatings, the darkness of the basement, and those suffocating days. Soon he becomes trapped in a terrifying nightmare. And then, in the middle of the night, he suddenly sits upright in bed screaming. His entire body is drenched in sweat. Terrified, he wraps his arms tightly around Arish. His breathing is out of control. In a trembling voice, he says, "We're leaving this place in the morning. I can't stay in this house for another second." The next morning, the entire family packs their belongings and sets out in search of the supposedly safe camp. The farther they travel, the more horrifying the signs of destruction become. After some time, their vehicle stops in front of a massive bridge. The scene ahead looks like something out of a nightmare. The entire bridge is clogged with abandoned and wrecked vehicles. It seems as if death itself once rampaged through this place. The sight shakes Francis's confidence. He immediately tells Arish, "This route isn't safe. We need to turn back." But Arish no longer wants to return to the farmhouse under any circumstances. To her, it is no longer a home. It is a prison built from fear and pain. Ignoring Francis's objections, she steps out of the vehicle and begins trying to move a barrier blocking the road. Francis keeps shouting for her to stop, but she refuses to listen. Then, the sound of heavy boots scraping against the empty road echoes through the silence. Arish turns around, and her blood runs cold. Standing before her is a horrifying zombie dressed in military uniform. Despite being infected, it moves with the speed of a predator. It charges toward her like lightning, but before it can reach her, bang! Francis's gun roars. The bullet strikes the zombie directly in the head, and it collapses instantly. Francis rushes toward Arish, but suddenly, the children's screams ring out. The gunshot has attracted dozens of zombies hiding nearby. Within seconds, an entire horde surrounds their vehicle. Joseph and Lucas are trapped inside, and death is waiting outside. To save the children, Francis fires another shot. This time the zombie's attention shifts from the vehicle to him. Then he notices a live grenade lying among the wreckage. Without wasting a second, he pulls the pin and throws it directly into the middle of the horde. The next moment, a deafening explosion erupts. A massive fireball rises into the air and dozens of zombies are blown apart. Somehow the family manages to get back into the vehicle, but fate still refuses to let them go. The engine gives out. The vehicle is completely dead. With no other option, they abandon it and begin the long journey back to the farmhouse on foot. The next morning, Francis returned alone to the bridge. After hours of effort, he managed to get the vehicle running again. But at that very moment, a dangerous thought crossed his mind. He had become convinced that the outside world held nothing but death, and that his family could only remain safe in that farmhouse. So he decided to tell a big lie. When he returned home, he told everyone that the vehicle was permanently broken. Now they had no choice but to stay there. To hide his lie and distract the family, he also repaired the old generator. After many months, the entire house lit up once again. The fans started running. Comforts returned. Francis began playing with the children and laughing with them. But Arish was closely observing this sudden change in his behavior. She began to feel that Francis was hiding something. Perhaps he simply didn't want them to ever leave this place. That night, Francis played an old DVD in his room. On the television screen, memories of their wedding came alive. The happiness, the smiles, and those days when the two of them had loved each other deeply. As he watched the video, Francis's eyes filled with tears. He didn't even realize that Arish was standing silently behind the door, watching the same video. Those old memories rekindled the love buried deep within both their hearts, and after a long time, they grew close to each other once again. But that peace was not meant to last. The next morning, Joseph and Lucas were looking through an old photo album stored in a cabinet. Then, Joseph's eyes stopped on one particular photograph. The color drained from his face. The man in the picture looked exactly like him. But it wasn't Francis. It was his uncle. At that moment, Joseph came face to face with the horrifying truth that had been tearing this family apart for years. Now he finally understood why there had been so much hatred and bitterness between Francis and Arish, but he still didn't know that once this truth came out, their family would never be the same again. That old photograph had shaken Joseph's entire world. Now he understood why Francis always kept his distance from him. The truth was that he was not Francis's biological son. He was the result of a mistake involving Francis's older brother Diego and Arish, one that had quietly destroyed the family from within. That was why every time Francis looked at Joseph, he was reminded of that painful wound from his past, while he showered endless love on his younger son, Lucas. The tension already present inside the house became even heavier. Yet despite everything, Joseph wasn't ready to give up. Gathering his courage, he stood before everyone and spoke about a new message he had received over the radio. He explained that signals were constantly being broadcast from a safe place called Delta Camp. It was said that food, medicine, and protection were available there for the survivors. Joseph believed that if they wanted to stay alive, they needed to get there as soon as possible. But the moment Francis heard this, his anger exploded. Calling Joseph a liar, he said, "Do you even have any idea what's happening out there? If there's any safe place left in this world, it's this farmhouse." There was so much anger in his voice that the atmosphere in the room instantly turned cold. But fate had another blow waiting for Francis. While heading toward the chicken coop, a stray dog suddenly leapt out of the bushes and attacked him. It sank its teeth deep into his wrist. Writhing in pain, Francis grabbed a gun and shot the dog dead on the spot. When he came inside with blood covering his hand, Arish's face turned pale. Francis tried to brush it off as a minor injury, but a growing fear was taking hold in Arish's mind. What if the dog had been infected? What if the virus had entered his body? By nightfall, another fierce argument erupted between them. Almost in tears, Arish said, "How long are we going to keep the children trapped here? We have to go to Delta Camp." Francis tried to appear strong on the outside, but the truth was that fear of infection and memories of the past were hollowing him out from within. For the first time, he began reflecting on his own behavior, especially on his relationship with Joseph. But the betrayal from years ago still stabbed at his chest like a dagger. Meanwhile, Joseph wasn't willing to back down either. He spent the entire evening trying to reconnect radio wires and capture a signal. He was completely convinced that Delta Camp wasn't a rumor. It was their last hope. But at dinner, Francis delivered his final decision. In clear words, he said, "From today onward, no one leaves this house. There's nothing outside except death. And don't even think that any camp has survived until now." Then he looked at everyone and added, "As long as I'm alive, I'll make all the decisions for this family." The next morning, Joseph decided to stand up to his father for the first time. He said, "I'm not a child anymore. If this is about the family's safety, then my opinion matters too." Francis stared at him for a few moments. Then, in a slow but terrifying voice, he asked, "If you had to take someone's life to save your family, could you do it?" Joseph hesitated, then nodded. Francis led him into the middle of a dense cornfield. There, a helpless animal was tied up. He placed a gun in Joseph's hands and ordered him to pull the trigger. Joseph's hands trembled. His heart was pounding so loudly he could hear his own breathing. He fired the first shot. The bullet missed. Seeing this, Francis completely lost his temper. He started shouting, calling him weak, cowardly, and worthless. Under that horrifying pressure from his father, Joseph finally broke. He closed his eyes and pulled the trigger. The next moment, the animal collapsed to the ground. The gun slipped from Joseph's hands. He fell to his knees and burst into tears like a child. Hearing the gunshots, Arish and Lucas came running. When Arish learned what had happened, her anger reached its limit. She shouted at Francis, "You're not making him stronger. You're breaking him." But before the argument could continue, a new disaster arrived. The sound of the gunshots had echoed all the way to the abandoned village nearby. And with it, death had awakened. Within moments, terrifying screams began echoing from beyond the fields. Dozens of infected farmer zombies came charging toward them. The family had no time to think. They ran for their lives toward the farmhouse. They somehow made it inside, slammed the front door shut, and rushed upstairs. But the zombies had followed them all the way home. Within minutes, the entire house was surrounded. Window panes began to crack. Doors started shaking. It felt as if death itself was waiting outside. Then, a loud car horn suddenly echoed from outside. All the zombies stopped at once. Their attention shifted away from the house and toward the sound. Within seconds, the entire horde ran toward the vehicle, and just like that, this family, trapped in the jaws of death, was granted a few more moments to live. Francis looked down through the window, and his heart began pounding. He recognized that vehicle. It wasn't a stranger's. It belonged to his older brother Diego, the same Diego, whom he had hated for years. The next morning, Francis quietly left the house alone. He was certain Diego was still somewhere nearby. After searching for a long time, he finally found him beside a quiet river. But seeing his brother didn't bring relief to Francis's face, only anger. He grabbed Diego by the collar and shouted, "How dare you come here?" In a calm voice, Diego replied, "I only came to see Mom and Dad. I didn't know that." Before he could finish, Francis informed him their parents were no longer alive. The news crushed Diego. He pleaded with Francis to forget the past and stay together. Surviving alone in this new world was impossible, but the hatred inside Francis's heart was still alive. Then, in frustration, Diego spoke the truth that had been buried for years. He said, "How long are you going to carry the burden of that one night? You know none of it happened intentionally. We were all drunk, and nobody knew what happened in the darkness. Yes, Joseph is the result of that night. But what fault does that innocent child have? Don't punish him for my sin, Francis. Accept him as your son, before it's too late." Those words echoed over the flowing river like an explosion, because now it had become clear that the zombies roaming outside were not this family's greatest enemy. The real danger was hidden in the wounds, lies, and secrets that had been consuming the family from within for years. Standing beside the river, Francis became even more enraged after hearing his brother's words. The wounds of the past, the ones he had spent years trying to bury, stood alive before him once again. His face turned red with anger. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at Diego. Roaring, he said, "Don't ever speak my family's name again, and get out of here right now." Diego understood there was no point arguing with Francis, but before leaving, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it over. It was a map showing safe routes completely free of infected people. In a calm voice, Diego said, "If you can ever let go of your stubbornness, head north using this route. People are still alive there. Children still laugh there. Crops still grow in the fields. And people live without fear." For a few moments, the two brothers looked at each other. Then Diego turned around and slowly disappeared into the fog. In anger, Francis raised his hand to tear the map apart, but for some reason, the next moment, he slipped it into his pocket instead. After returning home, he deliberately left Diego's old coat somewhere Arish would easily notice it. The moment she saw the coat, she understood everything. She realized that the person who had saved their lives the previous night was not a stranger. It was Diego. But Francis was moving in a completely different direction now. He had become obsessed with keeping his family trapped in that house at any cost. Day and night, he walked around with a hammer, nailing heavy wooden boards across the house's windows and doors, as if he didn't just want to shut the zombies out, but wanted to lock the entire world out of his life. Meanwhile, little Lucas wandered into the basement while playing. The moment he peered outside through a broken crack in the cellar wall, he let out a scream. Hearing the sound, Arish rushed over. Outside stood an old, weak, and nearly helpless infected person. He looked less like a predator and more like a lost human being. Holding Lucas close to her chest, Arish said, "There's no need to be afraid, son. He's not in any condition to hurt anyone." Standing behind the door, Francis silently listened to everything, and in that very moment, a dangerous idea was born in his mind. A little later, he took a gun and headed toward the fields. He followed that old infected man and mercilessly severed his head from his body. Then he carried the blood-soaked head back into the house. In front of the family, he fabricated a terrifying story. He claimed that extremely vicious infected were roaming outside, and that this was one of them who had tried to attack him. Scaring everyone, Francis said, "Now you must believe that there's nothing but death outside this house." But Arish had already read the lie hidden in his eyes. She knew that the infected man had not even been capable of attacking anyone. Now she was completely convinced that Francis was exaggerating the dangers outside so they would remain trapped in the house forever. Gradually, Joseph also began to suspect his father's actions. One afternoon, while Francis was taking a shower, Joseph quietly slipped into his room. After searching for a while, he found the map. The moment he saw it, his eyes lit up. It clearly marked safe routes that Francis never wanted anyone to know about. But then, the bedroom door suddenly opened. Francis was standing there. Seeing the map in his son's hands, his face twisted with rage. He snatched the map away and shoved Joseph out of the room. That same night, he did something even stranger. The dining hall was decorated, candles were lit, special food was placed on the table. And then Francis announced, "Today, we're celebrating Christmas." Everyone was stunned, because Christmas was still months away. When Arish asked how Christmas could possibly be in September, Francis completely lost his temper. He shouted, "If I say today is Christmas, then today is Christmas." There was a strange madness in his eyes, and in that moment, both Arish and Joseph realized that Francis was no longer just stubborn. He was slowly losing his grip on reality. A little later, Joseph found an opportunity to tell his mother everything about the map. When Arish mentioned the safe route to Francis, he flatly denied it, as if such a map had never existed at all. That was the point where Arish's patience finally broke. She said firmly, "I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm taking my children and leaving this place." The moment his authority was challenged, Francis's true face emerged. He looked at the children and said, "The woman you think is your ideal mother once planned to leave me and run away with Diego." Silence filled the room. Tears welled up in Joseph's and Lucas's eyes. With trembling voices, they asked their mother, "Is it true?" Arish lowered her head. Tears rolled down her cheeks. In a soft voice, she said, "Yes, but things were different back then. I was broken, but today my whole world is just the two of you." Even then, Francis's anger did not subside. He pulled the map from his pocket. In front of everyone, he flicked a lighter, and the next moment, their last source of hope began burning in the flames. A few seconds later, nothing remained but ashes. Seeing this, Arish's anger exploded. She stepped forward and slapped Francis hard across the face. Then she went to her room without saying another word. The next day, while Francis was out in the fields, Arish had a long conversation with the children. That's when she realized that they no longer had any respect left for their father. Only fear remained. They had begun to feel that the man they were living with had become the greatest threat to them. As evening fell, Francis returned. He brought heavy logs and dozens of large nails with him. Like a madman, he began sealing the main doors shut. Before long, he had permanently sealed every exit in the house. Then, in a stern voice, he said, "From today onward, no one is leaving this house." That was the moment Joseph finally reached his limit. He stepped forward and for the first time stood up to his father. "Enough!" His voice echoed through the entire room. "If we stay trapped like this, madness will kill us before the zombies do." Then he revealed another major truth. "You burned the map, but every line of it is etched into my mind. I remember the entire route. There's still time, Dad. Let go of your stubbornness and let us go there." Hearing this open rebellion from his son, the poison Francis had buried for years finally came pouring out. His eyes filled with hatred. Shouting, he said, "You have no right to speak in this family's decisions." Then he uttered words Joseph would probably never forget for the rest of his life. "Because you're not even my son." You're the reminder of the mistake that ruined my entire life." Everyone in the room seemed frozen into stone, but Francis was about to spew even more venom when suddenly, a horrifying scream came from outside. Bang! 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 Someone was pounding on the sealed door with all their strength. Their voice was trembling. They were crying and begging to be let inside, and the terror hidden in that voice made it clear that just beyond the door, death had chased someone all the way to their doorstep. The painful scream coming from outside brought the argument inside the house to an abrupt halt. The entire house fell into silence. Francis immediately picked up a gun and stood in front of the door. His decision was clear. He would not open the door under any circumstances. But Erich and Joseph were not willing to leave someone to die. Joseph showed courage. He pushed Francis aside and unlatched the door. As soon as the door opened, an injured man stumbled inside and collapsed. He was a soldier covered in blood. Erich immediately rushed to help him. While cleaning his wounds, she asked, "Who did this to you?" The soldier replied between broken breaths, "Our outpost was attacked by the infected. It's all over. But one man risked his life to get me out of there." He fell silent for a moment. Then his eyes filled with tears. Erich's heart started pounding. She gently asked, "Was it Diego?" The soldier lowered his head. His silence was the answer. A few seconds later, he said in a heavy voice, "Diego is gone now. He gave his life while saving me." Silence spread across the room. The soldier went on to explain that while dying, Diego kept repeating only one thing, that his family should leave immediately for Delta Camp. Tears streamed down Erich's face. She treated the soldier and pleaded with Francis to give him shelter for at least one night. After a long argument, Francis agreed, but on one condition. The stranger would stay only in the basement, far away from everyone, out of everyone's sight. That night, after the whole house had gone to sleep, Joseph quietly approached his mother. He held Erich's hand. Then he said softly, "Mom, I know everything now." Erich's eyes filled with tears, but Joseph cut her off. "Francis is not my real father. That's true. But for me, he will always be my father. I don't hate him." A few moments later, his voice grew serious. "But his fear is going to destroy this family." He explained that he remembered every line of the burned map, and tonight he would go out alone to scout the route. If the path was safe, he would come back and get everyone out. Erich knew there was no point trying to stop him. She kissed her son's forehead and with a heavy heart gave him permission to go. The next morning, when Francis arrived at the dining table, his eyes immediately fell on Joseph's empty chair. His face twisted with rage. He bombarded Erich with questions, but this time Erich remained silent, and that silence said everything. Francis understood. Joseph had escaped his captivity. At that moment, the last bit of reason left inside him shattered. Blinded by anger, he grabbed a hammer and headed straight for the basement. Before the injured soldier could understand what was happening, Francis attacked him. Within moments, the basement was covered in blood. The soldier had been silenced forever. Erich and Lucas screamed. But before they could do anything, Francis struck Erich with a powerful blow and knocked her unconscious. When Erich regained consciousness, darkness surrounded her. She found herself locked in the same basement with Lucas, the place Francis used to call the hell of his childhood. Now that same hell had become their prison. Meanwhile, Francis's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. He found the dog that had once bitten him. He killed it and cooked its meat. Then he served it as food in front of his family. Erich was horrified. She threw her plate away. At that moment, she noticed a knife lying on the floor. Secretly, she hid it under her foot. She hugged Francis in an attempt to calm him down. But Francis had seen everything. A few seconds later, she was imprisoned once again. Arish even tried escaping through a window once, but she fell from a height and lost consciousness. When she woke up again, Lucas was sitting trembling in her lap. There were tears in his eyes. He said softly, "Mom, will Dad kill us?" Hearing that broke Arish's heart. She pulled her son close to her chest, and at that very moment, one final plan came to her mind. She told Lucas to start screaming as loudly as he could. Within seconds, his voice echoed throughout the house. Panicked, Frances opened the basement door and rushed inside. But this time, Arish was ready. She pounced on him like a lioness. She shoved him hard, grabbed Lucas's hand, and rushed outside at lightning speed. The very next moment, she slammed the heavy basement door shut from the outside. As soon as Francis was trapped in the darkness, he began hearing his father's screams and the sounds of beatings echoing in his ears, in that very place where his childhood had been buried. The truth was, Francis had not been born a monster. Years of pain, psychological torment, betrayal, and loneliness had slowly broken him from the inside. But fate's cruelest blow was still yet to come. As soon as Arish and Lucas stepped outside the house, they found an infected standing in front of them, and the moment Arish saw him, her blood ran cold. It was none other than Diego, now transformed into a zombie. Before Arish could understand what was happening, Diego lunged at Lucas. His teeth sank into the boy's arm. Lucas's agonizing scream echoed across the entire area. That same scream reached the basement, and at that moment, the father buried deep inside Francis awakened. He broke the door down like a madman and rushed outside. Without wasting a second, he attacked Diego. Within moments, he killed him. But when his eyes fell upon Lucas's infected wound, his world stopped. Arish understood they had no time left. With trembling hands, she picked up a sharp tool, and to stop the virus from spreading, she cut off Lucas's infected arm. Lucas screamed in pain, but perhaps that was the only way to save his life. Francis dropped to his knees. Years of mistakes, hatred, and regret flowed from his eyes as tears. But Arish shook him forcefully. "This is not the time to cry. Get the car. We have to reach Delta Camp." Without saying a word, Francis ran. He knew this might be his last chance to save his family. But on the way, he ran into Joseph. Joseph stood there, holding a gun. Seeing the blood on Francis's clothes, he assumed the worst. He thought Francis had killed Mom and Lucas. In that moment of fear and rage, his finger squeezed the trigger. Bang! The bullet struck Francis directly in the chest. He staggered and fell to the ground. With his dying breaths, he grabbed Joseph's hand. "Your mother is alive, but Lucas must be saved." Tears streamed down Joseph's face. Then Francis looked at him one last time, and in a breaking voice he said, "I tried very hard to hate you, but the truth is, I loved you just like my own son." After saying that, his eyes closed forever. Joseph stood there frozen. His hands were trembling. The tears would not stop, but there was no time to stop now. He started the car, rushed to the farmhouse, seated his mother and the injured Lucas inside, and then set off down the path that had always remained safe in his memory, toward Delta Camp, where perhaps, after this long journey filled with death and darkness, a new dawn was waiting for them. So friends, that was the heart-wrenching story of Dead End. In your opinion, was Francis simply a madman, or a broken father who became his family's greatest enemy because he was terrified of losing them? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this recap, like the video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories like this. We'll meet again with a new story. Until then, take care of yourselves.